In this video, we'll go over every single constraint that we have in the Intraday Solver in detail. All right, let's get started. So here I just selected any random activity, and let's just start with the one in the top, the user filter. So what this does is it allows you to say this particular activity and all the other constraints that we're going to use will only apply to these particular users. So if you want to have the whole team, then don't use the filter, obviously. But if you want to point out, let's say, certain things to just a subset of everyone who's working on this day or in your team, then you just add their names or you select one of the user groups. And especially the user groups is very helpful if you have a bunch of people with certain skills. Just create a user group for them so that you don't have to add every single user. You just combine all those users in one user group, and you can apply that user group to the constraints with the user filter. So that's how that works. Next one is the time window. So the time window works in two different ways. You can say we have an absolute time, which is obviously just the time that you specify, or you can say a relative time. And the relative time depends on when the day for that user starts. So if we take a look here at Peter Griffin, he starts at 8 in the morning, then the relative time is 8 in the morning is when it starts. So here, if we say, okay, from 0, that means 8 in the morning. If we say 2, then that is 2 hours later, so that is 10 in the morning. And then, since this is the time window, we say the duration is from this time. So if we say 2 hours after 8, so 10, then if we take the next 4 hours, then it is from 10 till 2 in the afternoon. So that's how the time window works. And you can also select percentage here, and that is basically the same, but then let's say if you say, okay, 50%, then that's exactly in the middle of their shift, and then the time window starts. So then it would be the next 4 hours from the middle of their shift, so sort of like here, and that will be the time window. So to recap, the absolute time is just, if I say this is 7, then it means 7 in the morning, and the end time, if I say that is 1, then it is between 7 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. All right, so that's the time window. And what it does is it says, okay, if you apply this activity, so in this case the projects, it can only be added to a user within the time window. So that's the time window constraint. The next one, time required. And time required has two different modes. So you could either say, okay, this is the total for the entire day, for the entire team, everyone here, if we don't use it in combination with any other constraints, obviously. But what that does is we can say, okay, there's a minimum and a maximum. So if I know that, okay, we have for this particular activity, we have 10 hours of work, then it means those 10 hours will be distributed across the entire team. And that's a minimum, so it can also go over. If I say the maximum is also 10, then it will add exactly 10 hours of that particular activity to that day. Or if obviously if I say 30, then it will be putting anywhere between 10 and 30 hours of that activity. Now I can also switch it to per user, which makes sense if you, for instance, want to make sure that people go on break for a certain time. You can say everyone needs half an hour of break, or if we know that we'll need to do some admin work, then we can say, all right, everyone gets an hour or 2 hours of a particular task, like admin work, that they need to do. Then you add it as such Oh. And here again, you can use the bandwidth. So that's how the time required works. This constraint is occurrences. So that means the number of times that this activity can be assigned. So again, here we have the breakdown between the total for the whole team or per user. Pretty straightforward, honestly. So if you say, okay, everyone needs to have this certain activity once, then you put a minimum of 1. If it needs to be absolutely 1, then you just say, okay, 1, or you can put a bandwidth if you say, okay, we don't need everyone to do this particular activity. You can not have a minimum, but if at maximum anyone should have this assigned once to them, so maybe it's something that's really draining or difficult to do, then you can add that. And you can see here how most of the time these constraints, they make sense in combination with one another. So that's how the occurrences works, and can a constraint that might cause issues. So if, let's say, I want this to happen only once in the entire day, and I say at the same time we have time required, we need a minimum of 10 hours. If there are other constraints or other activities assigned, or no one is working 10 hours, then here I'm causing an issue. I'm causing an infeasibility. Then here I'm causing an here that is not possible. So what you can see is if I say, all right, we need, or let's say we need a minimum of 1. This needs to happen once the whole day, and it needs to happen for 10 hours. But it can only, it needs 10 hours to be assigned, but it can only be assigned once, and no one is working for 10 hours, then that becomes impossible, and you will see it becomes infeasible to solve this. So here you kind of have to be aware of what you're doing. So keep that in mind when you are creating these constraints, that they don't contradict each other to the point where they are creating an infeasibility and it is simply not possible to create a schedule. What this does is the minimum will be sort of a lower benchmark of we need to make sure that we have at least this, but it can still add more people based on this. The maximum will make sure it doesn't go over, but it will try to fill it as much as possible. But it is allowed to keep some gaps. It will try to go towards this, but it will not go over it. And the exact, as the name suggests, make sure that everything is exactly fitting to the line. So it will, if it is not possible to do that, then the solver will not run. Then again, if you turn on the soft constraint, then you give it a little bit more leeway, so then it is still possible again, but that is how these staffing requirements work. And as I mentioned, what's important is that you have staffing requirements on that particular activity that you are adding the staffing requirements constraint on. Otherwise there is nothing to otherwise there is no data for the solver, and it doesn't know how many people to add at one point in time. So as you can see here with the projects, it doesn't have any requirements, so then you need to add something, otherwise it doesn't work. Is concurrency. So concurrency limits how many users can be added to this activity at a time. So that doesn't schedule it, but it prevents it from happening, and that you have it or don't use it, that would be equal to 100%. So then it is possible, It's not going to do that by default, but it is possible that the whole team can do this at the same time. And then obviously if you say 50, then it's half the team. If you say 25, then it's quarter, etc., etc. So this, again, is one of those constraints that really work in combination with all the other constraints to make sure it is exactly how you want things to be, and that you don't have too many people doing the same thing at the same time. Again, one that's often used when to prevent the whole team from going on a break at the same time and that you are understaffed at other activities. Right, and then we are already at the end of the list. At the consecutive time, so that really applies to the activity, to the duration, so how long an activity can be in the schedule. So if we don't set it, then the minimum that Solver can use is 15 minutes, and that will break things up into little bits and pieces, which make sense for short breaks or something like that, but for most other tasks it is just a little bit too short, and then you have context switching, and that's very annoying. So usually you want to have at least an hour, maybe 2 hours that people work on a certain task. Then set that minimum. You can leave the maximum open, usually, you know, with all kinds of other constraints in place. It will automatically sort of cap things, but to make sure that people don't go work on something for too long for too long at a go, then you might want to set a maximum. If you know they lose focus or for whatever other reason, you can just add a maximum. So that's the end of our list. And if you have and do know that with a lot of these you have the soft constraint option, which makes sure that the constraint, if they kind of break, if you use them all together and you are thinking like, okay, this is kind of I want ideally, but it's also okay if it goes a little bit over, then you can turn it into a soft constraint. Here you can add a priority to also give it some weight, and by doing so you will give the solver a little bit more leeway to make sure you can find a feasible solution in most cases. All right, that's it.